Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Okay, we're recording, but Ashley, we won't do an intro right away. I want you to continue, unless you want to do one. But I want you to continue on that sort of train of thought that I rudely interrupted you, that you were speaking of, which was sort of like this, let's just call it magic within Christianity, and magic, not just within Christianity, but maybe also its prevalence in other cultures.
100%. So, like we've talked about, I'm not an expert in this area, and you know that. I'm not claiming to be, but what I am is very interested in this theme that we often see. So, we were talking about sort of this rise of Orthodox Christianity, and in some of the people that are practicing, they appear to be also presenting maybe a bit of an occult side. So that is something that kind of got us onto this conversation. And then you made the point that you noticed that and you saw that. So then that triggered my thought process of often we see these dualities in places that are predominantly Christian areas, whether that would be Catholicism or Protestant, that you still have these magical influences. So the first example that I thought about was in Italy, right? That you have the ability to put a curse on somebody, or I mean, not me, but some people do, right? It would be the Malocchios. Like you put a curse on them. They have the evil eye of protection that is commonly something that you would practice to protect yourself, or you wear the horn necklace to protect yourself from the evil eye, even though we know that it's a predominantly Catholic country. And then the other examples that come to mind is that you would see in Haiti or in Louisiana that you have this French Catholicism influence, but you also still have the theme of voodoo magic. Then we also see in Appalachia that would be normally considered a primarily Christian and not even have that heavy Catholic influence. But then you would have people still known as, Appalachian witches or practicing witchcraft or witch doctors or whatever you want to say. So there's a lot of examples that don't necessarily seem to be related to each other, where you kind of have this duality of, yes, we are Christian, but we also have this. And then the final thing that I wanted to point out is that we know that obviously in Mexico and Latin America, that those are heavily Catholic countries, but you have the practice of Santeria that is also something that is well known and would not be surprising or catch anyone off guard to bring that up, right? It's a known practice. It's known that it happens. So very interesting.
Okay, so I was able to come up with 4 response points, but I want you to actually introduce yourself, simply because you are one of I would consider you my podcast mentor, even though we're, I think, very close in age. You've been with me the whole time that I started the show, and even before that, and I appeared on your show, and it was a very seminal and important appearance for me, simply because it was my first appearance. So I think only made sense for you to come on, but I had obviously hoped that you had come on earlier. It wasn't, I hope it wasn't my negligence in having you on, but now you're here and I'm really excited. We spoke for almost an hour pre-recording on, like we could have recorded it. It was that good. Of course. But I want you to introduce yourself, plug yourself, and tell anyone about you, like with all the projects you've done, sort of the show you've built, and sort of what brought you to podcasting. Because I think that's a really interesting story as well. And we can really get into it.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I absolutely consider you my buddy, my friend. I'm ride or die for my friend Jen. So and we met because you joined the Unknowns Discord, which I think you found us through the Union of the Unknowns that had done a podcast with Brad Bingley, and then they also did a podcast with Monica Perez. And I don't even think that I was on for those, but I was part of that group. So that's how we ended up meeting. And yeah, we've done several podcasts together on different topics. We did our near death experiences work together. You were on the WTF forum a couple of times. You've been on the Union of the Unknowns, and so we've done quite a bit together. And no, it was not your negligence. You'd invited me on a lot, and I want to come on, but I have to say the caveat is that I feel like you are so well researched, and there's so many people in the space that are so well researched that I just feel like an imposter. And I feel like, well, I need to study this whole, I need to have my doctoral thesis ready before I go on a podcast, even though like you never put that pressure on me. We would just have a conversation. And I do have the desire to become a better researcher and really have, just really bring my stuff. But a lot of where I'm coming from, I think, is just observation. And sure, I pick up and read things here and there. Well, every day I'm like learning and reading something, but basically just that I'm coming at it from, for the most part, like just what I see, what is taking place, and then what we know foundationally, which is usually that we're being lied to. Um, so that's really kind of where I'm coming from. So that's why I have been hesitant to come on, because I just want to be prepared for the episode and to bring a good, to bring good work and good conversation.
Well, I'm flattered that you say that, actually. But obviously, you know that there's never any pressure to. There's no performance. There's no. We always have such good conversations. I
We
think
do.
you're a great podcaster. I love all, like, every time I see that you're live, and if I'm free, I will jump in, and I think that I think that it's, as I told you pre-recording, it definitely molded me in the sense of like how I want to approach it. I don't really consider myself a researcher. I'm flattered that you think so. I I really just think I kind of a writer, and then I kind of conceptualize the ideas that, like, whatever we're going to talk about. So like, yeah, sometimes with Robbie, yeah, I read the books of Enoch, but I didn't really like read any scholarly writing on them, simply because I just want to approach it sort of fresh. It's kind of like something I've been doing for you could say, like, some of my series work. That's how I always did it. I would read the work, but nothing else. I would kind of like be blind to the life and times of, or whatever, just the work. So that's
Okay.
kind of how I do it. And I just kind of think of it in my own way, my own like kind of tantric or non-dual way. And yeah, so I really appreciate that you say that. But obviously, I always kept a space for you, and you're welcome on anytime. For the
Well,
record.
thank you so much. I definitely appreciate it. And we've known each other for quite a while now in the podcasting space. So I'm grateful that we're still in touch after all this time, and just glad for us to be working together. And like you said, we talked for almost an hour before this, had an amazing conversation. It's always food for thought for me, which I absolutely love. And we're coming from this, like, we're so different in so many ways, but I think that there's an interest in the good conversation and like, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And with my experience, it's this. And I, I think it just makes for really good back and forth. And it's nourishing for the thinker, I think.
I absolutely think so. I think you and I spoke about this. It's just there's something magic about audio. Something even Nick and I often say when we're called rejects is like podcasting is magic. Like there's something very magical about it. Like whether people want to say that it's like the okay, magic's not that, but yeah, magic is kind of our black device, our black cube devices
Yeah,
with hidden rays and gemstones and gold and like clearly microchips are kind of a mandala.
for sure. And this is something that I tell people all the time when I have a conversation with them and we're talking about whatever the subject may be or whatever, topic, parapolitics,
Mhm.
whatever, that you say this, and I say this to them. My friend Jen always says memes are magic.
Yeah,
And so I think that that does apply to podcasting, right? Because you are disseminating an idea
mhm,
and whatever form that may take, but there is something, there is something of an influence that you're doing, whether intentionally or not, that comes from that.
absolutely. And that's literally what the saying is, like putting it into ether. Well, how do you put something into ether? You put it into sound.
Yes. Yeah. And it also kind of brings up this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I was talking with one of my friends and he was talking about mimetic viruses, right? So, like, you see something occurring in one place, and even though they may not have the propaganda, they may not have Hollywood or whatever you want to say, but then you start seeing that event occur in other places. What put it there? How did it get there? Are we dealing with a little bit of a hive mind situation with humanity? Are we dealing with what? It's in the ether. How?
Well, it's very clear, and you know this from all your research and good work on the cults, and like not necessarily the same ones that a lot of other people talk about, but I think that you've had very good episodes, very strong episodes, as a lead researcher on Jonestown, on Waco. I know I would consider you far more an expert on that situation than me. I think that there's a way that they're influencing human behavior on a mass scale. I think that's what mass media is. Like, I think that's not even new. Marshall McLuhan was obviously talking about this, and even the people from the, you know, the Frankfurt School. They were, it's a lot about how film needs an audience, cinema needs an audience. It needs a sort of receptor for its message. So
Absolutely.
I think that there is something in the ether, and I think that it's containable, in my opinion, just in my opinion. But I think that it can be. I think it's very difficult, and I think we even said pre-recording, like shout out to my episode on Twilight language with Low IQ Moron, and another upcoming episode on this exact issue, psychic violence. How we interact with mass media is a kind of violence. Aesthetic style is a kind of violence. And a lot of what our preferences are, I think, also are molded by how we interact with that. Like we were giving the examples of video games and how I'm not a Call of Duty guy, but if you give me like a JRPG or like I use the example of Resident Evil or Tomb Raider. If you're going to give me one of those, I'm going to solve the puzzle. I'm going to, I'm going to crack the code for the key, for the, the keypad. I'm going to figure out where the statue has to be placed on the black and white floor. Those things, like those are the things that I would, as a teenager, spend many hours doing. So I think that there's ways to silo people and sort of influence them subtly. So just through aesthetics alone, you can influence people very subtly. Like, okay, to then take on the identity of a gamer. What does that mean? So I like video games. I'm like the, eight at that time. I was like I don't think I was 18, but 18 to, we'll say 18 to 24. I'm that demographic. I'm like, I have a little extra money to spend. I'm a consumer of this kind of products. I think that they can nudge you into sort of ways of thinking simply through the identities and labels you give yourself.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting how complex it gets, though, right? So, what you named was several different video games that could be influencing. And just thinking about like the amount and the ways that we are influenced in today's day and time is pretty mind blowing, right? Because there's so many mediums for that to be happening. And I think it also gets into being, difficult in some ways and sometimes if you don't have a black and white approach of trying to discern what is trying to influence you in what way. You can even have an awareness that everything is put out there for a reason for you to be seeing. But what is the objective, right? And that
Right.
kind of does tie in with something that we had talked about with psychological warfare because there's so many aspects to psychological warfare. So certainly we know that behavioral modification or nudging is part of that, but it's not the whole picture. So there's just so much out there that is trying to or is capable of influencing us in so many different ways. And we don't know necessarily what that is. And maybe that's also part of psychological operations. Like we know that if you are trying to defeat an enemy without engaging with them, that absolutely keeping them guessing and keeping them confused is also a technique.
Absolutely. There's power in the decoherence, just as there's power in truth to tell a lie. You and I have spoken about this many times before. The best kind of lie is mostly the truth, maybe 95% the truth.
Right.
But it can also be a misdirection. That's also another really good kind of lie because it can almost be 100% the truth. It's very Epstein. It's very like, where are the tendrils leading you?
That's it. That's it.
But maybe that
There-
Epstein thing isn't even important. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm saying that maybe that's not even the story.
I would absolutely agree with you. And this is something that so lately we know that the rise of like Program to Kill and the work of oh my gosh. My mind is going blank right now, but the author of Program to Kill,
Dave Mcgowan.
David Mcgowan, yes. So we know that this book is becoming a lot more popular. It's in the whatever. People are reading it, looking at it, whatever. Yes. And so we know that the first example in that book is the Dutroux affair. And you and I have talked about the Dutroux affair before this. But one of the things in learning about, let's say, the Dutroux affair, or let's say the case about John Wayne Gacy, the clown and the Candyman, what struck me is that a lot of there's a lot of overlap, right? And when we saw the Epstein situation become like a really reaching a fever pitch here in the States, because the circling back to memes are magic, right? It was nonstop memes of Epstein didn't kill himself in whatever iteration that was, whether it was just like some forms of the meme would be like, let's say 3 facts, like 3 benign facts about something. And then the last one would say, and Epstein didn't kill himself. Or it would be hidden in a part of a regular picture or something like that. But it was nonstop. Like people were not letting that go.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much conversation happening around Epstein. But what I didn't see at that time, at least because I was not aware of Dave Mcgowan and Program to Kill and the Dutroux affair at that time, I didn't see other people bringing it up. Now, not to say that I didn't just, because I can be like incredibly oblivious, truly. So it's possible that I missed it, but I don't remember seeing just a repeated, like people just repeatedly talking about other examples of very similar situations. But that was there. It people knew well before this. They knew about McMartin preschool. They knew about the Dutroux affair and all this stuff that kind of ties in with the satanic panic of the 80s, right? They knew about John Wayne Gacy. They knew about they weren't necessarily as famous as the Dutroux affair, but just to say that why weren't people putting it together back then, I don't know. And maybe some people were, and like I said, I was just oblivious to it. But that surprises me in retrospect. But this is also one of my theories of why the thing that happened in 2020 that will never, ever, ever go away was that maybe the volume was a little too loud about people wanting accountability for the Epstein situation.
Oh, yeah.
But back to what you said, maybe that isn't the most important thing. And I would say that you're right. I would say that what it well supersedes that is the global spider web of what this represents. This isn't just Bill Clinton or, whoever else was implicated with Epstein Island. This is a well-worn network, and it is global. It is in Belgium. It's in the United States. It's in the Virgin Islands. This is not something that is just an isolated incident. And it's not something that just started happening in 2019, right? So I find that the whole thing about that to be very interesting is just as this is something that is a toxic global spider web. And you have these similarities that you see over and over and over again, which is people in prominent, they're prominent in the community or they're high up in politics in that area that are implicated in this sort of, ring or whatever you want to call it. And what you see is a lack of accountability over and over and over. So I definitely think that it's not the most important thing. I think it's a piece of the puzzle, which is how I look at a lot of this stuff is like we're information gathering and it's a little more information, a little more information. But that's one thing. And the other thing that I want to throw out there is that not only do I think that it is, this is something that we had talked about discussing in and of itself, but a little bit of the revelation of the method. Now, maybe some of that is that some things can be revealed or some things organically, accidentally get revealed, and then revelation of the method is part of how we manage that. But I also think that it's in a way subversive for us to know all this stuff because what is actually happening to these people, right?
Mhm.
Bill Clinton is walking free.
Mhm.
There does not appear to be accountability. And then you have people like Ryan Dawson, who says there is no list, which is fair. I think that's a good point. But he's also saying that there has been accountability. Look at Jean-Luc Brunel, who was an Epstein associate. Look at Ghislaine Maxwell. And I'm like, what do you even mean? Like, compared to the amount of people that we know are implicated in this, like we don't have accountability for them.
Mhm.
Anyway, that was a tangent.
Don't apologize. It was a good tangent. I totally agree. I'm a little skeptical of like all the major Epstein researchers in general. There are
Right.
some good ones,
Right.
but most of them I think it's like a lot of bullshit. It's just my opinion, right? It's targeted at no one. It's just
Right.
general. It's just in
And
general.
yeah, and I think you have to keep your wits about you, right? Because just like we were talking about, we don't know who is a disinformation agent
Mhm.
or what is the point of all of this, like, or who has what purpose. Like, we don't know. So I think we always need to be at least vigilant about that.
Exactly. And I also think that there is maybe look, from what I've heard, the Epstein stuff's bad. I'm not justifying it anyway. However, a lot of the girls seem to be willing. A lot of the girls were paid very well, millions of dollars. Some of them were placed in, foundations, doctoral programs. It seems more like an intelligence gathering network for people who want to play ball.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I'm also not discounting it because a lot of these girls were preyed upon. But if we're comparing, not that we want to do that, because I know that we both care and that we are cognizant of what kind of trauma these people could have endured, these girls. However, if you're comparing details of a Dutroux affair or of some of the other allegations that we've heard of those connections of what has been done to people, that's when, some of this stuff is really,
Yeah.
we're talking about films, we're talking about torture. And I do have to say that, yeah, the Epstein situation has been framed in a different way that, yes, they were involved in in acts with these men, but I didn't and not to say that's not there or not exist or something
Right.
that's being
Right.
ob obfuscated from us, but you don't see the allegations of, like, films of people dying, films of people being tortured, things like that. So, it is possible that there is a little bit of nuance in that situation and that it is a little bit different than some of the other things that we're talking about.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. It's not that I'm making a comparison, and I'm not saying, and you're definitely not, but there is a gravity of the Dutroux affair in particular, the horrificness of it, the true, you want to call it truly satanic um, presentation. That to me is much more grave. It's just my opinion, but I think that it's not fully comparable simply because, like, yes, the Epstein stuff is very wild. I would say that these kind of like weird sex cults, if you want to call Epstein, that's more, as you know, my kind of framing of it. It's a
Right.
kind of more of a sex cult, an intelligence cult, but a sex cult like they all are.
I think that that makes a lot of sense. It's not necessarily that I haven't really thought about sort of the juxtaposition of the two until right now, but it makes a lot of sense. And then I agree with you, and I think that there are potentially some overlaps, like obviously with this sort of with the technocracy, maybe, and a Brave New World type spin to this, and, because we were talking about, briefly, Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in, New Mexico, and then we kinda talk about this, like, weird behavior that we're seeing from Elon Musk by having IVF with a bunch of different women and not really being a parental role, but very much wanting to have the procreation aspect of it, and then almost all of his children are male as well. Um, so I think that that's at least something to think about. Now, the other thing that I have wondered about is if there was some more severe goings on with the Epstein case that we just don't know about. But what we do know is that these people at least survived. Virginia Giuffre, if everything is on the up and up with her and she's telling us the truth about what she experienced, and I believe Virginia Giuffre. Um, at least I have no evidence to think otherwise. But we know that she survived. Like, she wasn't killed on camera. She wasn't mutilated that we know of. She had plenty of food, things like that. So I do think that it's an interesting thing to at least think about. And then, like what you're talking about with like blackmail and intelligence gathering versus actual, like, sort of getting into like the satanic ritual abuse as
Mhm.
well as mind control. So I feel like these things could be certainly related in a
They're
category,
related.
but they're different.
I know you're a more nuanced person than that, but I'm glad that you're saying this just because that's exactly what I mean. It's like what Dave McGowan's talking about is not fundamentally what Epstein is. Is there a relationship between intel, sex cults? Yes. That's that seems very clear, but I just think that it isn't it's not of the same thing. And as I told you, like when Drizzle came on, he talked about the MK Ultra subgroups. So a lot of them were not for like satanic ritual abuse. A lot of them were for much more like what we spoke about at the beginning. Is much more to like reality testing, sort of like moral judgment testing, like different things, not necessarily to control you per se, but it's to kind of gauge your reactions to things. And so they want specific kinds of reactions from specific kinds of people. There are different sort of cults to suit your kind of vice or your kind of sin of choice, right? Like it's like
Right.
a lot to, so if you're into heterosexual, I'm just saying heterosexual simply because you brought up John Wayne Gacy, and like obviously there's a lot that aren't. And shout out to friend of the show, Q from Thoughts and Prayers. And he has another podcast called Twink Death, where they do sex attracted serial killers. So it's quite interesting because there's quite a few of them. But I,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I wanted, but what I'm saying about Epstein is like you're attracted to uh, post-pubescent, because I think this is an important distinction simply because it does seem to be maybe like what you said is true. There's cases we clearly don't know. There's cases we clearly don't see. We haven't heard about on a large scale. But I think broadly speaking, it's like if you're interested in this kind of, you know, get-togethers, arrangements, parties, whatever, this is like the place for you. But if you're interested in this other flavor, if you like this other thing, there's also something for you, just not maybe at that same location.
Right.
So I think that's also what I'm saying. I think that's you. Some of you also said it's like an octopus. It's like a, it's like a spider almost.
100%. And it's sort of, so like I said, this is something that I really didn't think about. It didn't really clarify in my mind until you pointed that out. Because I always felt like Epstein was related, that it was this spider web that was circling the globe, but I never really thought about it in terms of like what we've been talking about here, that you have these levels of what is happening. So, and it does very much circle back to your episode that you did with Drizzle, talking about these different things that we're testing, right? So, and we even talked about this because so many cults that we're aware of have intelligence associations, right? It's that way with Jonestown. It is that way with Nexium. It's that way probably with the Scythian cult or whatever they are, like that we just kind of became aware of. And and I know there were some other examples that I had, but and like Scientology and the Process Church, we have the structure in place that is cult-like, which is gonna have the same or a handful of fundamental cornerstone building blocks that don't change, but then the allowances within that are different, right? And probably it is associated with observing behavior and what can we get people to do, what can we get people to accept, what can we get them used to in many, many different circumstances, and how does that go? So it could sort of be boiled down to behavioral observation, but in many, many, many different iterations, and some much more extreme than others. But I also don't want to discount in some of these, especially like the Dutroux affair and some of the ritual abuse situations, that I very much feel that there is this thread of, and maybe a lot more than a thread of actual evil, of actual, um, what, and we even talked about that, like what is the definition when we say satanic, but something truly vile, truly evil, and spiritual. So maybe Epstein didn't necessarily have the spiritual element that he was harvesting and harnessing dark energy. But when you're looking at some of the other stuff like Dave Mcgowan covers, I believe that it's there, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of threads with this subject.
I read a paper by Michael Aquino, who wrote like the fucking book on Cywar.
Yes.
He wrote a paper called the Onyx Tablet. That's also interesting in comparison to what we were talking about with our phones.
Yes.
In that paper, which is not very long, and it's but it talks about how, like what you're saying, it's like there is an attention that if you apply your attention to something, what grabs your attention in the world? Like where do you place your attention? Are you captured by this narrative or this narrative? And to them, it was very much about narrative. Like they were more on that conceptual level where they're kind of like thinking, okay, theology is but one container, but maybe the way we present it will attract different people. And this goes back to your point at the very beginning. Like you're saying, you see a common thread, and I 100% agree with you. There is a common thread that where certain kinds of Christianity exist. And yes, it's in all kinds of Christianity, but the ways that it manifests is different because it's dependent on several factors. So I think there's an underlying kind of magical system if you want to call it that. Maybe it's just spiritual experiences. Maybe magical system is wrong, but there's a certain kind of, it's telling you that there's a way to maybe have these magical experiences. And it's particularly found in Catholicism, it's particularly found in Greek Orthodoxy, but it's also particularly found in these very transgressive SRA practices.
Right.
However, there is a way to, I'm not saying the SRA practices, I'm not comparing it, but I'm saying that there is a way that you can take the ferocious kind of left-hand path descriptions of things and you think of it just as a conceptual layer. Like Nick and I did a series on the Juggalos. They kind of do that. They have a whole like cosmology of the carnal ground. I think they call it's like the infernal carnival or something. It's very similar to what we would call some of the tantric Buddhism. When they told me, I was like, wow, this is like so similar. Why am I kind of like it just is reminding me of this. And then there's like a head clown in each quadrant of the carnal ground or this carnival that is like the head of this area, and you have to defeat him, and he's associated with a number. And I'm like, oh, I was like, this is just Kabbalah, basically.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so they have this whole system. So I think, and I'm not saying that that is left-hand path particularly, but I think it has the ideas.
Right.
And then I think that you just take those and you kind of internalize them and you kind of like process them as ideas, as like maybe spiritual workings. Like, I hate this word, but shadow working. You could say it's a way to process those darker impulses that everybody has. That's how we would
Right.
work in Buddhism, right? Like just something of the mind. Then I also think, though, that there are people who are more literalist or more like, if you read something on the page, that is exactly what it means. And then this is what you have to do. So I think that that is part of the problem, is that you have a lot of these guys like Michael Aquino, very, I would say, borderline autistic in many ways, if not. And I'm not putting down autistic people. What I'm saying is it takes a certain kind of tism to kind of make these very logical, rational, extremely cold, maybe cold-blooded, you could say, decisions. And I think it was about living out his like passions on this world. And there's a metaphysical implication. I think he would be very comfortable thinking of it and speaking of it in that way.
100%. 100%. So it was like in this particular, like with him, I think that there was, we talk about this all the time, but like there was function stacking for this type of behavior, because not only did you figure it out from a psychological warfare, like how could you manipulate and get a result from a human, like what do you need to do to them for that to happen, but you are also engaging in something truly heinous and spiritually dark that I think they got something from the practitioners.
Oh yeah, he definitely did. There's no question. Because even this is something that I've talked about on the show with other people, but like with Patrick, with Sochki, with Nick, with Todd. There is a kind of idea in magic that the way you live your life is your great work. That is your magic. Like that is how you are magic. Like, do you choose to get married? Do you choose to buy a house here? What's the number of the house? Like, there's all these little, like, it can be big or small. It can be, do you drink? Or like maybe for Trump, he doesn't drink. There's a metaphysical implication that would actually make him much more right-handed right away, simply by removing that vice. It's an interesting way to think of the world. If you start to realize that a lot of these people, talking about Howard Hughes, and he was clearly speaking to his shadow person or his high guardian angel. And this is often why he would rent out top floors of hotels and close all the curtains, something he was very notorious for doing for many years, over 30 years. This is someone who has like ocular sensitivity to light. This is very common among all magicians. And wonder like why particularly there are these like kind of traits that transcend different systems. Because obviously with Howard Hughes, we're talking about Mormonism broadly, maybe largely. And I think they also play perhaps oppositional, but at times aligned faction, which is something else that we kind of discussed. And I think that when we're talking about Psy-War, I think that whether there is an actual material opposing multiplicity of factions or maybe just two, I think that it's sort of inevitable that you have to consider it a possibility that factions are real, simply because not everyone is clearly aligned. Like with the Michael Aquino example, there are clearly ways to do it that are Christian, that are, you could say, we'll just say Jewish, like for Kabbalah, like there's Jewish mysticism. There's different ways to get there. There's Buddhism, there's Tantric Buddhism. You don't have to use the crazy loosh harvesting, like animal child abuse, sicko shit. Like you don't have to do any of that. It doesn't really, there's plenty of fast ways to do it.
Right.
But there's clearly people who believe that they have to do it this way. And that goes back to my point on literalism.
So one thing that we know about is that often people that are abusers were abused themselves, right? And then we also know that supposedly, and maybe this is, I don't know this for sure, but I heard this in, I was following the Brigitte Macron
Yes.
drama, and
No,
kind
it's
of,
really interesting. I think you know this. I'm very transfixed by it.
yes. And we were having, we were chatting about this, and we were talking about like, what are the implications? What is the real truth here? Like, why does this appear to matter? Because there is a huge element of degeneracy here. It's not simply that we don't agree with being trans and Brigitte is trans. It's not that. There's so many layers to this story. Like, first of all, we talked about the fact that it's likely that Brigitte is a major relative, maybe even the
Yes.
father or the uncle
And she'll
of,
lead up or
right,
one or the other. It's like there's
right.
something so weird about it.
Yes. So you have that layer, which is the absolute worst one to me. Then we have the grooming layer, the fact that the reported story and some people, the Xavier Poussard seemed to imply that he thought Brigitte was much older even. But the official story originally was that Emmanuel was 17 and she was 39. And then we learn that actually he was 14 and she was 39. But then there's the estimate that she may have even been 49. So you have that layer of degeneracy and the imbalance of that power dynamic. And the grooming and that, and then never mind the fact that yes, she presents herself as the first lady of France, but she's probably a man. And they're obscuring that from the public, and there seems to be very much a ritual and a reverence for people who do this, right? And then that led us down to like talking about other first ladies potentially, we don't know, but anyway. So but during this story, it was said that Emmanuel Macron comes across as just a complete psycho, right? And so it sort of begs the question of like, yes, I think we know that they can create certain behaviors from child abuse, and it appears to be like extremely horrible abuse that they can create certain behaviors in children. And we know about dissociative states and multiple identities and things like that, but that there's also potential of creating a psychopath, even if one was not there originally, right? And then so basically what I'm trying to say is that it brings in this element of not only someone enjoying these types of practices, but learning the practice and where did they learn it and was that done on them, and sort of the people that desire this kind of stuff, like, and were they gradually brought into it to gain this knowledge, or basically how did this occur for these people and then somebody like Michael Aquino? you know? And I don't have any answers. It just reminds me of if you can create a psychopath, and he certainly is exhibiting psychopathic behavior, being involved in psychological operations, like, you know, what is the root of that for these people? And we've talked about this too. And I think that I believe in the existence of demons, right? And like we said, that Cyprian has said that demons are banal and they just will, it's important for them to influence you, but whatever that influence may be, it's not necessarily for evil, but it's pulling you off the path, and something that you talk about all the time, the path. So like I said, I don't really have any answers, but I just find it to be an interesting thing to think about of like, how do we get there and what causes this um kind of situation that we have. And you have, like with Aquino, you're combining spiritual elements, truly spiritual darkness and the Temple of Set and Satanism or whatever with government work.
Right. That's the problem. If it was just like I'm not saying it's right, but if it was more of a spontaneous outgrowth, a theological outgrowth, so you say we lived in a purely Christian nation. Well, how can that be? This is something I often think about now. If they were more organic, if these things, just like the Church of Satan was just like this outgrowth that just happened because of like people having like problems with the patriarchy or like the patriarchal church, or you could like make an argument that okay, like, yeah, we don't agree with you, or like the majority don't agree with you, but it's like, yeah, you could see why maybe this came about in people who are just like kind of fucked up. But then once you realize that it's all been created, every single one, that all cults have an intel background, whether they're sex cults, whether they're black magic, whether they're Enochian, like summoning groups or whatever, like there is an intel element to the occult.
And something that I think about, and I think that sometimes I can definitely be too black and white. The main thing for me is that I don't want, because that's one of the main things that we were talking about, right? Is like, or at least for me, boiling it down to something simple and thinking that there are no factions, right? I can be guilty of that because I can just think that we all, like, everybody is on the same page and they're all working together. And even though I admit that there is room for nuance here, and obviously we don't have all the information, so we don't know who could be warring against who. Do they have the same bosses? Are they warring intentionally and they don't even know it? Like, we don't know. And I have an example of that we talked about that I want to mention, but just in talking about all this stuff, it leads to me that there is this huge spiritual element. And we know that so much of history, even recent history, even what did a vaccine mean or what did a virus mean in 2018, right? So we know that this stuff is getting changed in real time. So something that I often think about is, so what else has been obscured? What else has been changed, even slightly? Um, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now, but uh Bill Cooper. Okay, so he wrote the book Behold a Pale Horse. And we know that chapter 15 in that book is talking about the protocols of the elders of Zion, even though he says this is not, it's not the who's, that's not who I'm talking about, but that may be who is presented here. Okay, if you go and try to find that book now, chapter 15 is missing. It's not there. So we know that this is real-time erasure of what was what. And even another example, the Foundering on Twitter. He's been posting about an episode of the Brady Bunch in a certain season that was simply talking about measles, how people used to talk about measles, which is, oh, like, Bobby has the measles, I guess he's home from school, like, everybody's fine, and we're got the measles checked off for our household. It can't be found. It almost cannot be found anywhere anymore. It's removed from streaming and things like that. So we know that this happens even in these recent examples. So what does that mean for history. Like, we know there's a lot of questions about a certain world war that happened in in the 1940s. Like,
Mhm.
what are we missing from that? We know that things are intentionally obscure. So what does that mean for ancient history, right? So what does that mean for it, like the element of this dark magic or whatever we want to call what they're doing? Like, where did they get that from? Does it all have the same roots? Is it a meme? Is it, you know what I mean? Like, I just, in my thinking, which can definitely sometimes be too simplistic, I just feel like it does lead back to an ancient order who are on the same page. And how do they have this knowledge? That I do not know. Was
It
it handed to them in some, like, mystical experience, and it's been carried down all this time? Like, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No, don't be sorry. That was great. So, okay, so I'll try and answer all of that. Is that I agree with you, and I think that you know this simply because of my interest in Central Asia. So obviously the reason I even started podcasting, that's the reason why I went on Union of Unknowns feed. That is sort of my like what I think is interesting because it does
Right.
talk about this, right? Like the world island, the axial, the swastika, I know. But yeah, it's turning. It's a wheel of time, it turns.
The Wheel
Therefore,
of Time. Yes.
and it more related to the North Star. I know a lot of the, esoteric killer has sorted to inform you it's actually related to the North Star rather than the solar wheel. So, what else about it? Okay, it's turning, and so there's always been transgressive cults, you could say, or transgressive practices, or like, but a lot of this, and Robbie Marks, who I did the series Book of Enoch, and I'm sure by the time this episode airs, I'll be working on a different series with him since he's already asked me to, is that um, he he thinks that a lot of this is the outgrowth of Jurvanism, which is kind of like time god worship, what we would call Mahakala in like the more dharmic system. He thinks it comes from that, which is like a third to fourth century kind of outgrowth of Zoroastrianism. And I also I have a related theory. It's not competing. It's definitely complementary, but it's a little distinct in that I think actually the second Babylonian exile. So what happened in the first and second century? You have the prophet Mani appearing from a certain messianic community, and then you also have they kicked out the rabbis from the primary Zoroastrian temple. Is basically what happened, and the rabbis before they were exiled, they copied down something that the Persians had been working on, which is the tree of life. And then Aristotle had developed this axial system, like a 4-quadrant system. Maybe he didn't even develop it. Maybe he just stumbled upon something one of his teachers said or something, or some
Right.
ancient scroll, right? Like who knows? But he developed it. It became the Aristotelian dialectic. So I know a lot of blame. People love to blame the Platonics and maybe even the Neoplatonics. I'm not either of those things, but I think that you can look at the Aristotelians and they definitely contributed to something that we call the philosophy of religion. So that didn't really exist. It was kind of just like you just do what the book tells you to do. So the book tells you the astrology, you do this ritual on this day. That was pretty much all there was. And then this idea came that maybe there's more. There's more. Maybe you can divide God and the ideas of what he is in the world into 4 quadrants. So that's basically what they did. So they divided it into time and space, good and evil. And you can also say light and dark, but still using 4 quadrants. And so you could say that everybody kind of took a little piece of that thing. That's certainly what Neo-Process believes, or Process, the original Process Church, is that they were sort of reconstituting that original idea. And I think there's actually probably some merit in it, if with the caveat that they were actually saying they channeled this information. So they didn't actually look at it from a historical lens, like you're saying. They actually would say it's historical, but they received it through interaction with the spirit.
Right. Which I certainly think that that is possible. I 100% believe in the possibility of receiving information. Um,
Well, the
you know,
Templars, right? The
yeah.
Baphomet. That makes a lot of sense too. And you could also say that that 11th century timing, that could have been the origin. So that's obviously what the boys and I discussed on the Toyman stuff was like the origin of the Templars and the Cathars and the Ophites, and they're talking about this sort of like re-entry or relearning of the mystery schools. So in this case, it would have been the Syrian mystery schools or the Syrian Gnostic groups at the border, which is very interesting if you think of what's happening geopolitically right now.
Right.
And that region has traditionally been, to bring it back to the original point at the very beginning, has traditionally actually been a place of Jinn worship. Not my name, but Jinn with D. I always have to clarify that because people always think, but it really doesn't have the same meaning. It's like there's a relationship, right? Because my name means gold. So yes, there are Jinn who are associated with gold, but that's not what the word means in Arabic. So let me just clarify that. But yeah, so that region has always been a place, if you want to call it a very ecstatic Kabbalah area, like a place where they deal with spirits, they deal with angels, they deal with demons, they believe in it all. They're a little bit Muslim, they're a little bit Jewish, they're a little bit Christian. It's kind of all mixed together.
Right.
So yeah, I think that totally is plausible too. And then you can also look at the 1700s, and then Benjamin Franklin ties the key to the kite and he discovers lightning because people didn't know, of course, what lightning was before
then.
Right. So I think that, yeah, a lot of this is metaphor. I think like that story is a metaphor. I think a lot of like the Templar Baphomet stuff, like, yeah, I'm sure people did practice it. But I think that there's also a part of that that's a metaphor. Like you can just interpret it allegorically. You don't have to say it's like literal. And what's interesting is I just released, well, I won't say what episode, but it was I did an episode and I did a quote from Stephen Flowers. He's a very famous, like temple upset, like kind of like he's an edgelord kind of guy, like who I would choose to like use a quote from simply because it's kind of edgy, right?
Right. So was he was an acolyte of Aquino?
I mean, yeah, they probably knew each other and they definitely knew each other, but I wouldn't say he was an acolyte. He was probably more of someone who was doing his own thing and he was very focused on like the Norse kind of stuff,
Okay.
much more than Aquino was. And although Aquino definitely had an interest in it as well, but I would say that they were working on different things. And but he had a quote about the words, like using like magical words, liturgical words, taking words from that we would consider like secret or sacred words, maybe like you could say 72 names of God, like that's even a very Christian example. Or like multiple names are found in Revelations frequently. Or the idea of multiple names, or the idea of gates, or the idea in the book of Enoch of like God has 72 names, but the lower name that you use is kind of the lower expression of him too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's to sort of tie it all up. I just think it's like they kind of get it. They kind of get that there's a conceptual, he's saying in it that there's a conceptual way that they are also looking at the material. And I think in this is just my theory, Ashley, is this in Psy-War, a lot of Psy-War is about what story you believe in. So if you believe in a sort of theology or cosmology that says, I'm not saying you, I'm saying for people who are maybe more regular mainstream Christians, if you believe in a cosmology where all spirits are demons, even angels, like, or you could say that like just everything but God is evil. Like I can accept that you believe that. That's no problem for me. It doesn't offend me. Nothing. But you're going to then experience everything demonic, right? Because every spiritual experience you have is going to be tainted with that idea that it is demonic in nature rather than maybe something higher. I'm not saying it is higher, but I'm just saying that how you frame things. And like you brought up the idea of the ayahuasca. And this is something I talked about with James. But like the narrative about the machine elves, the Rogan narrative, that that tells you what experience you're going to have, even if you've never done ayahuasca. That's priming you for a specific psychedelic experience.
Right.
Because I've done San Pedro, and I definitely did not experience serpents or machine elves,
Right.
100%. So I'm just saying that it, like, knowing the story of something, sometimes that can color your perception of like the actual experience itself.
Definitely. It absolutely can. You have these like preconceived notions, absolutely can affect what your experience is, for sure. Um, and and speaking of like what you were talking about with kind of these, like if you're accepting, basically back to the conversation of, is it a Christian nation? But we talked about this, or like in combining, like you're saying in Syria, a little bit of everything. But that is very much interwoven into the culture here. Like we were talking about these practices of the evil eye as a prevention, or the Malokios as a curse, or Santeria, or voodoo, or Appalachian witch magic, or whatever you want to say. Like there is that other element that is interwoven and is accepted, right? Like you grow up knowing about voodoo
Mhm.
in pop culture. It's a known reference, right? And it's not considered something that is like impossible, or like really that's even called out, or even Santeria. I mean, it's just, you just know that it's a practice of people that also say that they're Catholic, or people that also say that they're Christian.
Yeah, 100%. See, this is the thing, is that because Christianity, I'm not saying Christianity at large, but because the Christianity that they've, I guess, you could say co-opted, but maybe that's not quite even true. Maybe that's just institutional decline. I think that's more of a moderate kind of way to look at it. But then I think you can also say that, yeah, they've cultivated a kind of Christianity that does not respond to metaphysics. Kind of these like, everyday, pragmatic, magical concerns that have sort of been around for thousands and thousands of years, maybe like since the dawn of time. But I argue, and then many other occultists are Christian. That's just the case. Is that Christianity presents a kind of a working of the tree. Now, is it for everybody? No, it's not. And I'm not saying it isn't like a gatekeeping way. I'm just saying, like, not every in Buddhism, how we would say is that not everyone has the karma to do magic, because it's very difficult and it's very dangerous. So it's better for most people to not do it. It's better for even people who want to do it to not do it.
Right.
Better just to focus on the path as it is. And then you also make of it a little bit of like what you want. So I think there's an interesting idea that I've even explored on the show. It's really interesting to me that you brought it up, this idea of like because the episodes haven't even aired yet, on like, what is the American religion? What is the American Christianity? What is the American Buddhism? What is the American Dharma? This is something I talked about with Alex Rivera as well. Like, what are all these things? What would they even look like? And it is a little weird. It is a little tacky in a cool way, of course, like a more Mexican kitsch way. But yeah, like, that's the truth. I think that's the American thing, is like, it's a little syncretic. It's a little, yeah, it's maybe not orthodox, but it's maybe not transgressive either. Maybe it's just a little like, I think that's just how it is. I think it's just like your grandma, she reads the Psalms, she does the Olympias. You burn sage when you need to. You sprinkle some rue on the floor when you need to. Like, I'm for people to do that, because like legit, those are just practical solutions to like real world kind of pragmatic spiritual concerns, whether they're real or not real. I think it's useful to like have people to have like a broader knowledge of religion as a practice, maybe as like maybe that's not even a practice, maybe it's just like religion as magic. I think that's a useful thing, because the reality is like, as we discussed, your phones are magic, memes are magic, words are magic, media is magic, your thoughts are magic. So really, you should be doing magic on also a practical level, but that doesn't necessarily mean like cracking open like the Teen Witch book, but it just means like being aware that it's being less ignorant, I guess. I'm not calling people ignorant. I'm saying more as in a Buddhist way, like the sin of ignorance, like not knowing or denying. I think that's a really interesting position that I see a lot of truthers say, oh, all magic is black magic. Well, that's true in a way, because like you could say that any kind of alterance of reality is black magic. Sure, I can accept that. But then like where do you apply, like where do you go with that? Like you're going to use a little magic, and we all use magic because we all use phones. So like where do you want to go? And I think we spoke on the trivium too, and how important like those sort of foundational pillars would be of like truth, rhetoric, logic, what we're looking for, how we say it, and like are we honest about it, in the sense that like you say with your approach is that you relate things that you're looking at. You're relating your immediate perception. You're not holding it there. You're just saying, this is what I see. Maybe this is what this headline means. Maybe
Right.
this is what this story's about. But then you'll
Like this,
alternate it. And so I always appreciate that.
yeah. And I try to think like this is what makes sense to me as where I'm currently at with the knowledge that I currently have, right?
Mm.
And I think to kind of go back to the discussion about religion too, something that interests me, and like we're not solving anything. Like I think that you are offering a much more educated perspective than me. So I always like hearing what you're saying about it. And then we talk about things from like a spiritual perspective and a material perspective. Like these have been conversations that you and I had, right? So from a material perspective, I find it very, very fascinating that we have this sort of merging in different geographic locations of religious beliefs and of these magical practices. And I think that, again, not that I have any answers, but it's just interesting to see that it does happen and it becomes accepted, right? Like, I don't think anybody, well, like when I was growing up, it was just accepted that like voodoo could be a practice and you could find that in New Orleans, right? In the States. Or the same thing with like what we were talking about with some of the other stuff in Haiti and Italy and Mexico and Latin America. So I just find that to be,
Well, there's also a Masonic layer to every
yeah,
single example that you gave. Like I've never discussed this on the show, but I will for you because you're one of my favorite people. So
thank you.
great.
You
But
too.
so the Haitian voodoo houses are Masonic, absolutely Masonic. The French left Haiti after liberation. They had a priest teachers training college on the island that was deeply tied into the Blue Lodge system of the French. It was a Masonic order, so you had to also be a member of that Masonic order to be a priest. Well, priests are the most powerful, considered to be the most powerful bokors or sorcerers, as well as hoguns, which are voodoo priests. So you don't have to be an evil priest. Like you don't have to do black magic. You could maybe just do hogun, like be the leader of a voodoo house. And I think for the most part, I don't practice Afro-syncretic religion in any way. I don't really think that they're particularly. I think just look at the fruits is
Right.
my suggestion. Like look at the fruits of the places where those beliefs have taken root or that are
Fair,
taught.
very fair point. Very fair.
And so that's pretty much how I think of magic. Like where does it bring you? Where does it bring you materially, but maybe more importantly, consciously? So I'm not endorsing. So let me just say that. But I'm not decrying either. I'm just saying it's an interesting, you have to look at it more like anthropology, right?
Yeah, and that's why I enjoy this conversation because and I'm certainly not, you know this, that I'm not like holding on to any specific idea so tightly. Um,
Mhm.
we're just weaving threads. That's all we're doing because originally this episode was going to be about psyops.
Well, I think we
And
were.
we did exactly, but not in the way that I anticipated, right? And but there's threads everywhere, and it deals with all of these things, and it's been, I don't know, it's kind of mind bending a little bit to sort of process what we've talked about and how this stuff does tie in together, not in a way that I would have expected. Like some things for sure, but not
Yeah.
everything, you know?
No, you're 100% in that, and so I am. So I apologize for taking you on like a journey through
No, it's been fun. It's been fun.
the
It's been
metaphysical
food
world.
for thought, which I love.
Okay, well, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thought it was. I actually thought we did do. And I know you said we did do Psy War and we did do psyops, but I think that you have to think of everything as a war. As I said, like aesthetics is violence. So like every media choice you make is a kind of like a psychic violence. It's like a kind of inflicted harm, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be harm, right? Because as I said, and as you said, a lot of this is like how you frame things, and then also like where do you place your attention. Like I was a big not into the Epstein thing since I would say I haven't been into that story since like 2021,
Right.
but I'm really into the Brigitte Macron kind of like sicko dark fairy tale, I guess you could say.
I
So
would say that's a very good descriptor of that. Yes. It's like the anti-fairy tale. Yeah.
yes, yes, it's just so sick. It's like it can't kind of bring you anything. So I kind of like see it now, like even discussing it with you, like we've been kind of like privately messaging for weeks on this topic, and I just see like, is there a resolution? Well, as you know, Xavier Broussard said there will be.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting to me too because we also have talked about that in the form of like what spiritually, like why, and maybe we won't necessarily have an answer in that regard. However,
Right.
it's it certainly ties in with these elements. Like, is there a religious element for the people that are practicing this, and what power, strength, um, essence do they receive from running this charade to the public?
It's
Yeah.
very weird. I mean, it's weird, but I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. But let me just say, to all we'll call them the black pill people or the anarchists out there, Trump fucking bodied Keir Starmer. I mean, he basically told that dude to shut the fuck up. It was free up. It really was.
Yeah, we've talked about that because, you're definitely encouraging. You do not want people to be black pilled. You've said this many, many times, and I appreciate that. And I also don't want to be black pilled. Like I, it's almost like I feel like I have an overall understanding of what is happening, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to let it get me down or make me a nihilist or make me or whatever. Because I think that in there's a lot of there's a lot of things that are positive and to be grateful and glad about, first of all.
Yes.
Second of all, something that I think about sometimes is because, and you talk about this all the time, and you know that I know about it, the concept from science fiction or fantasy literature, the actual Wheel of Time books, but we talked about the Wheel of Time turning. So sometimes I think that no matter what, like it's all just cyclical, that we have these times when we're in more of this like chaos situation, whether that means it's the new golden dawn that we're headed into, or whether that means, like who knows,
Yeah.
or at least I don't know. But I just feel like there are these cycles that humans are experiencing. And we talked about that, right? Like the Vaisha age, like the merchant age. And um so it's a well-worn, well-established theme of existence for humans, right? And again, not something that I fully understand, but it's something that I just think about. Like, we're just in this time, we're just in this transition, we're just in this odd state where, like, in some places, liberty is hanging on by a thread, and maybe that's just where we're at on the wheel. I don't know.
Okay, I'll say that you do understand because that's really what it is. I think that you understand in the most fundamental way, which is that it is just fictional, but it's also kind of real. Like there's a little bit of both, and that's okay. To be in the unknown is okay, and to be kind of in that space of flux, that space of decoherence. I know you're a fan of Pink. I'm not really a fan of Pink in my personal life, but in the conceptual idea, I think that's what Pink is. It's like that decoherence, something I talk about very frequently. It's
Yes,
like this
all the
idea of
time,
it-
which I
yeah.
I love.
But I just think it's good to remind people because in Pink, you can also find truth, right? Because Pink sort of lends itself to guiding the contours of things that arise within it and around it. And you can also say that the truth is love in a way, not necessarily, it's definitely not sexual, but it is love is kind of like the way you approach things, the way you're kind of like, you can dance with an idea rather than be fixed in it. So I think that those are the most important kind of interrogative uh, positions for any researcher, any podcaster, any I'm not an influencer, and I know you're not an influencer, and definitely we don't think of like ourselves as that in any capacity. But I just think that anyone who is, those are some of the things that I think make you more like, what are you doing with your project? And if you're looking for those three things, I think that's actually like maybe not a recipe for instant or long-term success, but it's definitely it's a very solid framework and foundation to build work on.
100%. And I feel like there's something about that you can feel good about the direction that you're headed if you use that as your kind of like your rubric for proceeding, right? Or, and from an Orthodox perspective, this is something that Cyprian said all the time. He said, truth is a person. And so I really like the idea that we are in the pursuit of truth, that we are pursuing something that matters to God. And I know that there's different opinions out there, and like you said, it's more that I have an idea of what I think is right, of what is a guiding light, a guiding principle to me, and I try not to be so attached to ideas or something that I think that I know that I cannot entertain another thought or good faith conversation one way or the other. But the truth is really important to me. And so I really like the idea that if truth is a person, that we're pleasing God by pursuing the truth and trying to find the truth. I hope.
Well, I think that I think Sochki would agree, who is the kind of expert on Esoteric Kabbalah or Kabbalah of the Moon. I think he would also agree that as a person, I often have said on my own show that it's a beautiful girl dancing in the moonlight. Sometimes she's there and sometimes she's not there. Very much like Sailor Moon, very much like the Millennium Kingdom, because that's what it is. It's like sometimes it's there, sometimes you see it, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have a connection to it,
Right.
sometimes you don't. But it's always there. You just have to look for it. So on that note, it was a wonderful, amazing, incredible, dope as fuck, everything, all the adjectives.
Thank you so much.
And please plug your things, which I will, of course, include in the show notes.
Absolutely. They can find me over on Twitter at think_change_2. And also I run the Union of the Unknowns at Union Unknowns Twitter handle. And that's where I'm doing most of my work is with the Union of the Unknowns podcast. And we do Not Your Mama's News, which is basically, I know you're familiar with it, but basically, we just bring random stories and just talk about them. Some of them are crazy, wacky for a little bit of levity in the clown world today. And then also I've started working with Jason Barker over at Knights of the Storm, and I'm going to try to be working with him as a co-host on that show, and hopefully working with Angry Tiger and Karen Carpenter over there. So kind of just getting started in that, but yeah, exciting.
I'm really excited to hear that. I can't believe you left that as the kind of Easter egg for the end, but I'm really excited what podcasting is. So yeah, I think that there's a real power in conversation. So I think that we agree on a lot of things, but I think on that we definitely agree.
Thank you so much. I had a blast.
Vegeta. Thanks.
For what? I should be thanking you, Kakarot.
Nah, what do you mean? I loved every minute. Goodbye, my friend.